Welcome to South Coast Matters. I'm Paul Latendra. Today back with me is my occasionally absent co-host, Julie Taylor. Welcome back, Julie. It's
Thank you.
really good to have you back.
More absent than not.
I know.
Well, so Paul, it is good to be back. And today we're pleased to host independent candidate for U.S. Senate, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Hope I said that right.
You did. Great. Great to be here.
Well, Shiva holds 4 degrees from MIT. He's a Fulbright scholar and has started 7 successful high-tech companies, including EchoMail, Cytosolve, and Systems Health. He's currently the founder and CEO of Cytosolve, Inc., which is discovering cures for major diseases from pancreatic cancer to Alzheimer's.
Shiva is also the founder of the Center for Integrative
Systems.
Systems that performs fundamental research and systems thinking, and is home to innovation course. When we talk to him, we're going to hear the name word systems, and one other word we're going to hear a lot too there.
Yeah, email.
Email, yeah. We could go on, but we only have 28 minutes for the show, but he has a long background. Before we talk about all those achievements, I want to hear about your background now. You came here from India. You have a very compelling backstory, an amazing backstory. You were born as a despicable or a untouchable in India. And that caste system's now defunct, though, as I understand.
No, the caste system is still, active. You just don't hear a lot about it.
Okay. It's not as formalized.
No, I mean, my mom used to say in India you could get discriminated 9 different ways, but in America 3.
Okay.
And if you worked hard enough, you could even overcome that in this country. So.
Right.
I'm sure it's been a long road from Mumbai to Cambridge. Now, were you born in Mumbai, or?
I was born in, at that time it was called Bombay.
Okay,
and then they changed the name to Mumbai.
Okay.
But I was born there, in 1963. But I had 2 different experiences in India, which a lot of people today don't even have. One experience was in the city of Bombay, or Mumbai, which is
basically an enormous city, correct?
Enormous. It's like if New York is a melting pot, Bombay is like an industrial furnace.
Okay.
You have every religion, every caste, hundreds of different languages. And then
were you raised in a Hindi religion?
Yeah, I was brought up as a Hindu.
Okay.
But Hinduism is such a disorganized religion. It basically believes God's in everything. So you basically,
there are hundreds of Hindu sects, aren't there?
Hundreds of different sects, but the fundamental thing is my grandmother's home was a small farmer. You had the picture of Christ and you had the picture of Krishna. All of these great avatars, right?
Okay.
So, but I grew up in Bombay, but I also spent at least a third of my life in a small village in deep South India. So it's as different as New York as Mississippi would be. The outbacks of Mississippi. So I had these 2 very different experiences. And my grandmother, used to work 16, 18 hours a day in the fields. She was a poor village farmer. But on weekends...
I've heard the story.
Yeah, but on weekends, she was trained in traditional systems of Indian healing.
She was a medic.
She was a medic. And if you go look at all traditional cultures, even in this country, every town, every village had the local medic, right?
Yeah.
In those days, it was literally a shaman or a healer. And my grandmother had learned the traditional ways of healing people, which include the use of herbs and spices and meditation and yoga and all different modalities. So it was, and it was always personalized. So it recognized everyone was unique. You were a unique you, you were a unique you. And if you both have the same ailments, you would have to have very different types of treatments, right? So it was, today we call it personalized medicine, but that was a part of traditional medicine that existed for thousands of years. So my grandmother, for example, used different methods of diagnosis. In the Indian system, you use pulse diagnosis. But one of the more interesting ways is you could observe someone's face. And the theory is, the face never lies, which means that the face is a window into the physiology of the body, right? So different organ systems, dysfunctions, et cetera, are presented in the face, your imbalances. And the idea is that you could understand when people are healthy, when they're not unhealthy, what organs are not unhealthy, and then you would support people to get back into balance through diet and food. So in the Indian system of medicine, all disease had always one solution, which was diet and nutrition. And the idea was to bring people back into balance. So my grandmother, on weekends, 20, 30, 40 people would be lined up, and she did this for free. Her view was that medicine was an honor to serve people, that you were not supposed to charge for it. it was supposed to be something you gave freely because it was an art form. It was an information science and an art.
Now, would she mix the medicines and give them to them, or tell them how to?
No, she would mix them. She would mix them. So I remember as a young child, I remember someone had a sinus issue, and she sent me and my uncle into the woods to get this very particular herb. And what's interesting is she put the flower in the guy's nose and she tapped it. This flower has microscopic needles, and it relieved, you saw a little bit of blood come out because he essentially had a clot.
Yeah.
So these are things that are learned over, many.
And it worked.
And it worked. And now we're discovering, I think a few weeks ago, there's a big article in the Daily Mail, a woman who had cancer, wasn't working. She took significant doses of curcumin, which is the active ingredient in the herb called turmeric, which is a root, which is a yellow root, a brilliant yellow, which is the active herb in curry. Curry is a mixture of spices. So the reality is these people tested stuff over thousands of years, and they came to conclusions of what did work and what didn't work. So, but that was really my motivation and a deep interest in medicine and science. How could this woman who had tattoos all over her arms, who you would consider uneducated, how was she able to heal people? And that really drove my interest in medicine.
Now, who did she learn all of these skills and knowledge from?
It's a great question. You see, we think people have to go to universities, but the way people used to learn was one-on-one, mentoring and apprenticeships. You would have to sometimes work for someone, and then they would teach you these secrets. So she was actually born in Burma. Burma was known as a center of Buddhism and cobras, right, both of those. But she learned from people who'd come along the way, and she'd study with them. But this was always one-on-one training. So, you were passed on ancient wisdom, right? It's not like you have to go to Harvard University, right? You study this one-on-one.
Was she your mother's mother or your father's?
My dad's mother.
Your dad's
my dad's mother.
Okay.
But similar, my mom's mother had a whole other set of traditions, right? I mean, the women in homes were considered the healer. It was an integrative art, right? Women healed, they served the communities, they did many things. It wasn't that they just had children, right? They were professionals in some sense.
That's fascinating. How did your family end up coming to the United States from Bombay? What circumstances led to that? And being from the lower caste must have been a leap. It
was 1 in a trillion. I mean, if you really look at it, Paul,
okay.
The fact that my mom and dad even met and their own is basically, it's like they're pretty amazing people unto themselves. My mom came from a broken family. The father ran away with the maid when she was one of 9 kids. My dad grew up in war-torn Burma, literally in foxholes, and then he literally walked back to India, at the age of 10 or 12, had never studied. But they were both very, very interesting people in the sense something in them drove them to realize that education was the key to liberation. So my mom now think about this, these are low caste Indians, and my mother is at a time when women are never supposed to get educated, essentially supposed to get married and serve a man. So here my mom stands up on her own 2 feet, realizes that the father ran away from the mother, and she decides she's never going to let that happen to herself. So there's a picture of my mom, in this very interesting picture, this dark-skinned Indian woman among 50 men with turbans. This little woman sitting at the corner, and that was when she got her master's in statistics. I think she was the first woman in India to do that.
God bless her.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then my dad came from another origin, came back from Burma, and then he studied under a mango tree, someone who taught him. And he ended up becoming an engineer, and ended up becoming the head of manufacturing for a guy in India. So my parents did not have to come to the United States. This is what's fascinating. They had very good jobs. They were in some ways, India's brain power. And if you remember, after when Sputnik had gone up, right, in the 50s, the United States was very motivated to build their technology base. So they, I forget the exact act, I think LBJ had signed it, and the act allowed immigrants to come to India based on merit. They had to have very particular occupational skills. So here my mom was a statistician, good in math, and my dad was an engineer. My dad came here first. We had to wait about a year. And I remember them having to submit, hearing them, their resumes, their reference letters. It wasn't like they just came here. So that's how my parents came here. Now, it was interesting enough, my dad actually came here for training. There's a company called Unilever. So there was Unilever India. They had sent him here for training, I think in '68. And the people here said, you don't need training, we can actually use your talent.
Okay.
And so, but he didn't want to jump ship. He went back to his boss in India and asked him permission. He said, you should go, it's a great opportunity for you and your family. So my parents didn't need to come, but they came for my sister and I because they thought this was a huge opportunity to get, you know, much more educated, much more freedom. So that's how they came. So you won't find a lot of Indians like me because we're of that, like you said, the untouchables. So when we first came, we settled in Paterson, New Jersey. So think about this 1970 Indian, very traditional Indian family coming to the United States. I remember...
Was there much of an Indian community in Paterson?
Very little.
Okay.
I mean, it's primarily African Americans,
Okay.
right? But it was interesting. It was like Bombay in some sense. Remember, this is the era of Vietnam,
Yeah.
sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So it's a very colorful environment. You have huge cars, right?
Yeah.
Bell-bottom
compared to-
jeans,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
So it was a very interesting world for us to come from India at that time. And, you know, so...
Now, were you an Anglophone at the time? Were you speaking English?
Well, in India, remember, British
Yeah,
had
I
British had come
understand
to
that,
India
yeah.
in whatever, Battle of Plassey, 1657. So we, you know, British was a common standard language,
Yeah.
right? So I could speak English. I did not know anything about snow. I remember landing in Kennedy Airport on literally December 5th. We left on my 7th birthday.
Oh, wow.
3 days later, we landed on December 5th. And I remember walking off the stairs, and I was wearing shorts, and I remember it snowing. So that was my first experience of snow. Never had seen anything
Welcome
like
to
it.
America.
Yeah, welcome to America. That's right.
So you grew up in Paterson? Is that where you went to high school?
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. My parents always believed in education. Now Paterson was one of the poorest cities in the United States. So my parents, whatever money they'd earn, they kept moving to different public school systems. There wasn't school choice per se, right?
Right.
And my parents were very much into anti-elitism. It's an interesting part of who they were. So they didn't believe in private schools, nor could they afford it. So we went from Paterson to Clifton, little town, a little bit better school system. And then about a year and a half later, we went to Parsippany, and then later to Livingston. And if you look at the income levels, you know, Livingston is predominantly Jewish town, very wealthy people, and Paterson is primarily African American, very poor people, right? So they just kept hopping to the different school systems. So in 7 years, from 1970 to 1977, we literally went through 4 different school systems. But I took advantage of that because I knew what an incredible opportunity that it was. And I was compelled to do that because I knew when I went back to India, I think 75 I went back, that's when I realized the stark difference between America and India. You know, like how much we had it here. And I was so thankful. And I remember coming back when I was told that I decided I was going to work very hard and take advantage of this opportunity. So by the time I was 14, I'd finished up all my math courses, calculus. My high school had no other courses. I was actually taking college level math and got accepted to a special program at New York University. This is in '78 now, when a computer, for example, would fill up the size of this room.
Right, right.
But there was a very, very innovative professor at New York University who just passed away last year, Henry Mullish. He realized that America would need skilled labor of software engineers. And in fact, he was visionary enough to realize that maybe we should train these high school students. So he selected 40 students out of a national competition who would get to come to New York University, the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences. And I was one of those 40 students selected. Even though I wasn't eligible, you had to be in 10th grade. I was in 9th at the time. And my dear mom would drop me off at the Newark Penn Station, 14-year-old kid, and I would take the 1.5 hour train ride in at 6 a.m. into New York, take this course. It was like a military type intensive computer science course, 8 weeks, graduated top of the class, learned 7 programming languages. And then
In
after
8 weeks, you learned 7.
it was intensive. It's like, you know, it's a computer language.
Yeah.
You got up at 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. Sometimes we stayed longer. But think about this. Parents are afraid to send their kids down the street. This very different environment now, you know, walking through Washington Park where people are selling drugs and stuff. So that's the environment that I grew up in. And then after I finished that, I had some high school humanities courses left. And I was very fortunate to get a full-time job as a 14-year-old kid in Newark, New Jersey, in a medical hospital. And the job I was given was to do programming because I could program pretty good, you know, because computers were just new. And I was given an interesting challenge.
Were they punch card programming?
Yeah, so I knew how to do punch card programming, but in that year, '78, mini computers were just coming, the Hewlett-Packard mini computers. So I was given a job at a guy who's still alive, Dr. Les Michelson. He's the head of high-performance computing at Rutgers. This was at the University of Medicine and Dentistry in Newark. It just got absorbed into Rutgers. And many of you may remember that in 1978, the environment is interesting, just to take you back to that. What role did women have? What were the jobs that a woman could do? Typically 4 jobs. A woman could be a nurse, a housewife, a teacher, or a secretary. Well, in this medical hospital, had about 1,000 offices, every doctor always had his female secretary, and the secretary always had a desk. You remember this? And on the desk she had a typewriter. She had white paper where she typed away a thing called a memo. But on the desk she had an inbox, an outbox. She had huge file folders behind her, a trash bucket, paper clips, whiteout, right? And when she wrote a memo, it had a very particular structure: to, from, subject. Sometimes she did a thing called a carbon copy, where I would write.
Still smell carbon copy.
Exactly, exactly. I would write a memo to you, and I would say, I'm going to CC you.
Yeah.
And so she'd have to put the one paper, the carbon paper, another paper, and click away. If she had to do 10 carbon copies, she'd be writing there probably for a couple of days. So, and then that thing got, sometimes if you were hiring someone, you would write a cover letter, you would attach their resume, and you'd forward it to people in the organization. Everyone made comments, and it came back. That was the inter-office mail system. And that was the way people communicated, collaborated. It was the thing before social media. And I was asked to convert that entire system, a very complex system, into the electronic version.
Yeah, 15 years old?
14. Now you got to understand, there were methods. We're not talking about electronic messaging, simple text messaging. You could do a little, that's like the telegraph. We're talking about that whole system. I wrote 50,000 lines of code, used to work until 2 in the morning. The rule that Dr. Michelson had was, he goes, I will treat you like an adult. So I used to come in with my briefcase. I used to work. Very serious. And, the people there were typically 30, 40, 50 years older than me. And I called this system email, a term never used before in the English language. A few years later, I got the first U.S. copyright for it, officially recognizing me as the inventor of email. So that's what I learned as a young kid in Newark, New Jersey, and then went off to MIT.
So you came here when you were 7 and did 7 different school systems by the time...
Four different school systems.
4 different school systems by the time you were 14. So how were you accepted by the populations in the different towns that you lived in?
Sounds like you didn't have time to do any social life.
Well, I played, I had a lawn mowing business.
Okay.
I played baseball. In fact, I was at American Legion Boys State. I was in varsity baseball. So the thing is, my parents brought me up never to segregate yourself into being a nerd. So it was hard to, I was with the jocks, and I was also, I was the best student in a class of, when I graduated Livingston, 800 students, I was, I think, 1 or 2, right? At the same time, I got accepted to American Legion Jersey Boys State, which is you have to be an athlete and a scholar. So that was sort of the thing that my dad really believed in this concept of being wholesome in that way.
What position did you
advice.
play?
I played short and pitcher.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pretty good. So the interesting thing was, to answer your question, 1970s were an interesting time. I mean, you had Maharishi coming here, the Beatles were into meditation and yoga, so people were very curious about Indians, right? Because there was this whole undercurrent of interest in alternative types of experiences.
Yeah, water pipes were the big thing.
Yeah, all those things, right? So I never, so I grew up among working class people, people of color. In Newark, it was, my friends were the custodial workers, the secretaries, et cetera. And you have to understand, when you look at the invention of email, it would not have been done without women. It was those secretaries who were where I took the notes on what that system needed. So I was exposed, fortunately, to everyday Americans, It wasn't an elitist environment. And I was, I never experienced any level of discrimination among that strata of people. I experienced it more when I went to that elite high school in my last 3 years. I experienced more levels of discrimination there than I did in Newark, than I did in, in Clifton or Parsippany, among everyday working class people. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
I do want to back you up. Are your folks still alive, your parents?
My dad is still alive. He's 85. My mom passed away about 6 years ago.
Okay. Now, and you came here with your sister?
My sister, yeah.
Now, how's she doing? How's she?
She went to Harvard Medical School. She's a...
God bless her.
Yeah, she's a medical doctor. and occupational health doctor.
Okay. But you hate Harvard. How the hell did you get in there? Never mind. That's
Well,
different
we'll
story. That's
talk
for
about
next
that.
show. Okay.
The thing is, I'm against elitism.
Yeah. Okay.
And basically the notion that you have to get a stamp. Look, I did email before I came to MIT.
Yeah.
In many ways, MIT got a great student. MIT, many of these Ivy League institutions actually get really good students and actually rubber stamp them. I would argue that the students are actually serving those institutions more nowadays, particularly with so much education being online.
Right.
They're essentially getting the branding of those institutions.
Does your sister integrate any of your grandmother's teachings into her
She's
medical
actually a
profession?
cannabis doctor.
Oh.
Okay?
God bless her.
She basically believes in medical cannabis, but I guess she took that route, which is essentially recognizing that she's really, she's a believer that the whole addiction problem, opioids, these pharmaceutical drugs, are really the real problem. That many, like cannabis, can actually be a healer for that. So I guess she has that element with
Is
her.
she local or is she?
She is. She's local. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But
So then how did you get from New Jersey to Massachusetts? Just by
MIT.
virtue of going to
well,
MIT?
it's an interesting story. See, but you got to understand, I was one of these overachieving kids. I built this email system, done all this stuff. I actually did not want to go to college, believe it or not. I actually wanted to do carpentry and design. I still love doing a lot of art and design work. My parents, in my senior year, had gone to India for about 2 months to take care of my grandmother. And my mom was always helping people, and she had helped these 2 women who were homeless. And they didn't have a place to stay. I think the husband had thrown one of them out. And so she let him stay in our basement. We had a basement apartment. One of the women's boyfriends came over and he said, "You should go to this place." And he gave me the brochure. It was called MIT. And I remember it. It said Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I thought it was a mental institute. Because the dome, it was too much, right? And I said, I'm not going to go to this place. So 2 weeks later, I think the application was due 3 days. He said, "I'm not going to leave until you fill this out." So to spite him, I took a pencil and I filled it out. Now the MIT application had an interesting part of the application. You had to draw a cartoon character. It was Beetle Bailey was mine. I think Mort Walker just passed away recently. So anyway, I get accepted. And I come to MIT for the orientation, for the looking at what the place was like. And I saw all these people look completely unhealthy to me. Now, I was an athlete, I was strong, I lifted weights, and these guys look crazy to me. Hunched over, a 17-year-old kid looked like he was an 80 or something. So I was a little bit turned off by the whole place, and I said, I'm not going to go to this place. And then finally my physics teacher said, "Oh yeah, I should have told you that's a good school." See, then after I got accepted, then there was a level of discrimination in that school.
Sure.
Then people started telling me, because then it was kudos for that high school.
Sure.
And so my physics teacher said, "You should go, not because of MIT, but you'll like Boston. It's the Athens of the world."
Well, not only that, Cambridge seems like you would fit right
Exactly,
in. It's a
Cambridge,
melting pot. And it
a
had
melting
all
pot,
the,
all the arts and science, etc. So that was a reason that I came. So on September, I think 2nd, I came to MIT. It was the orientation. On the front page of the official MIT newspaper, they listed 3 kids. They said, we have an interesting class, 1,041 students coming, and they listed 3 kids who had done something interesting of note, and it said, there's this kid who built this email system. Now, I was brought up as a humble Indian, so I said, well, that's interesting, and I moved on. But that's what, so I came to MIT as an undergrad, but I was really interested in systems. I had enough credit to leave MIT, I believe it, in 2.5 years. But I was interested in this caste system. I was interested, I think my interest had moved beyond science and engineering because I sort of mastered that as a young kid. So I started studying with a guy called Noam Chomsky, who's a pretty left radical thinker. Why was there a caste system? And I sort of figured that out. So I got very much interested in political systems. In 1983, 84, remember Jesse Jackson was running for office? Remember Reagan? And then there was Mondale, and there was this thing called the Rainbow Movement. And I said, that's interesting, it's anti-establishment. But then at the last minute, if you remember, Jesse Jackson gave out all of his votes to Mondale, the lesser of two evils argument. And that's when I broke with both parties, and I started studying politics more heavily. And that's when I realized that across the world, across the United States political history, there were always 3 dynamics of systems. I'm a systems guy. One was the establishment, those people who enjoyed keeping things the way they are because it profited them. And then there were another dynamic called the change agents, everyday people. You know, like in the time of Susan B. Anthony, you know, the Democrats laughed at Susan B. Anthony when they said that women should get the voting rights. She went onto the streets, or the civil rights movement. I realized it wasn't really Martin Luther King who did that. There was other people's names we don't even know. And it was movements that changed things. And then I realized there was the third part of the dynamics was the not so obvious establishment. The people who claim they want to help these people on the street. But what they actually do is they exist to take the anger of people who actually are the change agents and say, you know what, you don't need to do that, you know, join one of these two parties. And if you look at this last election, here was Hillary Clinton. I mean, the dynamics are so amazing to watch. And the Romneys and the Obamas, the Clintons and the Bushes all came there, right? Because they were so scared of a guy over here called Donald Trump. Whether you like him or not, he was an agent of change. And in the midst of that, the not so obvious establishment was Bernie Sanders, right? Because what does he do? He uses the word revolution, hope, and at the last minute he gives his votes to Hillary Clinton. So from a political theory standpoint, I think by the time I was 18, 19, I'd become pretty sophisticated. And I became an activist on campus. We started a newspaper. I organized the food service workers. I made sure more women, poor whites, poor blacks came to MIT. So I became a real, in addition to being an inventor scientist, I was also very, very interested in change. Like, what are the dynamics of change? So, systems guy, you know? So I went in and out of MIT. I would go to MIT, did my first degree, started a company, came back to MIT, did another degree, would go start another company. So like that, I went in and out. 1 foot in academia, a little bit of a love-hate relationship, and another thing, I'd build stuff and actually learn how to sell it and start businesses. It's, you know, the American innovation.
It's always good to continue learning, to never
Definitely,
stop learning.
definitely.
So it's good that you
I
go
think this
in
whole
and out.
concept of, you know,
This whole show's about learning. You know, we're
Yeah.
learning. You're teaching us today, and all our guest teachers. And I always learn much more from my guests and from.
well, you
Julie,
learn
too.
by teaching, by the way.
That's true.
Believe it or not. You learn, you take a concept, one is doing the homework, the other is when you have to teach. There's a very interesting dynamic that occurs with humans when you teach. So that's where they find that you don't really need a teacher. In many ways, you learn by teaching.
Right.
Animals do this all the time, yeah. A younger kid will do this with an older kid better than the parents can even teach.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a good point.
So you make your home in Cambridge now, yes?
Belmont.
Belmont.
But
Oh,
my
right
office is
next
in
door.
Cambridge. I pretty much lived all over Boston, probably in
Yeah.
10, 20 different towns. I came here in '81, so I've been here almost 36 years now, 37 years.
So you're very well grounded in Massachusetts.
Definitely.
That's good.
Yeah.
And the road from Mumbai to Cambridge is certainly a long, bumpy road. I'm glad we know that part of you.
Yeah.
Good. And we're almost out of time, but I need to read this quote because it's about democracy. And we're going to get you back and we're going to talk about democracy and government and business and how they relate to each other. But democracy, in the end, is a difficult, costly human endeavor. We must be free enough to pay its cost, which means having the time, the energy, and the education, and the care. You got to give a crap to self-govern. Then and only then can we be citizens. Otherwise, we're just subjects. And I love that quote. That's Umar Haig. I'm not sure, but he's a brilliant man. And I'm Paul Attendra. I want to thank Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai.
Thank you to Kim Murphy, Ben Fortier, and Walter Sabina at TCAM TV in Taunton for the use of their studios and their valuable help, without which this show would not exist.